Hi, welcome to a new episode of Startups Rights. Today, my guest is Toby Call. He's the CEO and co-founder of Mass Balance, which is a very cool space biotech company. Welcome, Toby.
Pleasure to be here.
There's so many things I want to discuss, and I've prepared some questions. But before, per tradition, because every guest has such an interesting backstory and background, I want to start with your background, which started in academia, did PhD at Cambridge. I guess my first natural question to you is, at what point and why did you decide to transition from academia to the startup world and becoming a founder?
Yeah, so I think in PhD in academia world today, entrepreneurship is kind of everywhere, and you're exposed to it from quite a while. I mean, so I did my undergrad between 2000 from 2009 and PhD about 2013 to 2017. So but even I say back then, it's not that long ago, but there was a heavy kind of emphasis on entrepreneurship and lots of programs, extracurricular stuff you could do. Now it's even more. There's so many opportunities, and frankly, PhDs are moving towards becoming more like apprenticeships and kind of startup breeding grounds, which is fantastic. And there's so much more to do there. It's still untapped, I believe. Um, and yeah, I think it's just kind of if you're creative and you have you're working with science and frontier tech and in the lab, it's kind of an obvious thing to think about how can I create or have more impact with what I'm doing. Um, Jumping into the a startup from academia is a massive jump, and it still is today. It's a massive mindset shift. The way I always think about it is you go from academia where you get data and you religiously plot your graph to match what the data is telling you. But you got to flip that mindset to draw a line on a piece of paper and say, right, we're going to build that and, produce a platform that whatever that's going to build the data, or sales that's going to make the data that's going to make that curve happen. And yeah, I think, you have to have a sense of, I guess, indignation at like a problem that you want to solve and a view that you have the right tech to the right platform or abilities to go and solve it. And definitely a sense of stubbornness, a slight sense of madness and self-righteousness, a healthy mix of understanding and self-righteousness that you can actually go and make a change there. I think most of all, uh, for me, it was if I'm going to get super stressed about something, I'd like to get stressed about my own problems.
When you look at universities, when you're starting a company out of academia, I feel like sometimes it can be easier because there's so many resources available, especially now, accelerators, fellowships, student run organizations, just so many things available. So it makes it easier, even not purely from, let's say, capital or kind of accelerator perspective, but more so just like, you find your colleagues, you find your co-founders among your classmates and among your like lab mates. When you're starting something from scratch, you have a cool idea, but you don't really have that access to those resources, to those communities and inbuilt ecosystem. Like, how should you leverage your, I guess, existing network or resources to build something?
Yeah. Something I kind of, the journey I went through is very relevant recently. I mean, so it's often the seed for a startup team will come from, yeah, exactly, your lab mates, your colleagues in a company. There'll be a kind of preset team from a project or something that you say, hey, let's work together. And that can be great because that can say you've already kind of pressure tested how to work with people, whether you like them or not, whether you think they're actually, you can actually go through the trenches with someone. It could also give kind of preconceptions as well if it's people I guess you think but then they turn out differently, or I guess it's and there are more and more mechanisms intentionally being set up. Mechanisms like Entrepreneurs First, Adler, etc., who do a great job of bringing people together at the very very beginning. What I went through didn't have any of that, and really came out of a previous startup and with no kind of preset team for Mass Balance. And that was actually kind of a very challenging thing, but also opportunity. So it was an opportunity to look at it from the ground up and think and take the time to think, what do we need in terms of a founding team? What's the real composition, the ideal kind of founding DNA of a company? And that really affects it in the future, how you build the culture and the direction and we go. Um, And yeah, so what do you do? I mean, it takes effort. It's not easy sometimes if you don't have some of those preset structures, and you need to really flex kind of every networking tool you've got. Go to every single event, even if they're loosely relevant. Get to know everybody in the market that you're looking to go into. Um, Even just like becoming friends with, become friends with all the investors in that space. Just have conversations for enough time so you can really form that network that starts to pay dividends by the virtue of the network size itself. And there's, I went to, as I've been obsessed with space and biotech for a long time, even during my PhD. And because I'll tell you about the story. But was going to conferences in space and biotech as a hobby to start with for a long time, for many years, and that kind of developed into more recently actually intentional networking, but also kind of on a personal basis. And as you spend time building conviction in your thesis and your idea, and thinking, actually, no, this is genuinely, we've got something here, you start keep speaking to people, become the guy who's doing the thing, and people will start coming to you, and be useful to people, connect people, and then so that's, I think, just getting out there. And if anything is stopping you getting out there, maybe it's a work situation or just preconceptions or just a bit of shyness. Deal with that. Get out there. uh, and good things will happen. I spent over a year looking for the perfect co-founder for Mass Balance, and met a lot of incredible people, incredibly talented people who are doing amazing things right now in similar fields. It didn't work out with a lot of people for various reasons: location, timing, whatever, personality. So I was super happy to meet my co-founder Vishnu, eventually through like just brute force networking. And I think the origination was someone I'd met through the YC Connect platform, not even from there, but then they connected me with someone who connected me to this other crazy guy who's thinking about space biotech, and also happens to be a super talented deep tech, deep biotech guy. And we just really hit it off. And even then, when you kind of meet, you're kind of thinking from the ground up, what's this partnership going to be? You have to be very structured about, okay, how you're going to approach this, because you're potentially going to be working with this person for a long time. It's kind of like you're getting married. And so what we did was a very, intentional, kind of, call it like courtship process, kind of a series of meeting and getting to know each other, quite intense, often like every day of a week, just kind of having like whiteboard sessions and getting to know how each other behave and we think. And eventually decided, there's a really good partnership here, both on, the personalities, the egos or lack of match, how we think about empathy in a company, those personal side of things, almost more important than the skill set. What's the skill set you need? And for Vishnu, it was very clear that he has the deep protein engineering experience, whereas I have much more of a kind of generalist biotech, tech bio, been in startup, got a PhD, but also done the space stuff, kind of background. So yeah, it's we're off to a great start, and that really sets the. It was intentional to set the identity of Mass Balance as being a biotech company operating in space, not a space tech company doing biology.
That's really cool. That's a very, very nice way of putting it. And I guess I'm curious, is being a second time father makes it easier to kind of read and understand people better?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny, like being a serial founder in this is technically, which is what I am. I always say that I know how much I don't know now, at least, which is infinitely more than I knew the first time around. There's still so much to learn, and I'm so hungry to learn. I can't wait, and the team's hungry to learn. It's fantastic. You kind of know how you work a bit better in when things get really tough. You know how what you're good at, and also you're more humble about what you're not good at as well. So I'm very happy to have people who compliment me in the things that I index less strongly on, and I can do the same to them. Hopefully, and it's yin and yang. So um, yeah.
When I was doing research for this episode, I remember reading a blog, I think, where you mentioned you went to this space biotech conference in the US, and you were the only biology person, I believe, there. Everybody was engineers and physicists. So it seems like your interest in space biotech has been there for a while. But you started your journey with Hurdle, which was a diagnostic company, quite a bit of success. I guess what was that light bulb moment, or just convictions that made you shift kind of from tracking biological health on Earth, but actually to actual manufacturing it in space? And what was the reason? What was the conviction behind it?
Yeah, so we've had an incredible journey with my co-founders at Hurdle, and credit to the guys. The company's still going strong and is going to be a leader in AI biomarkers, and they're doing incredible things. It became the right time for me to pursue this really wild dream that I've always had from way back when during my PhD, as you surmised, in space and biotech, because of the way that space in particular is evolving as a sector. And really, now is the time, now or never. And I would always regret not going after this as a company that I really feel that I want to dedicate my life to. And not it's not kind of that or the healthcare side of things. On We are very much looking to improve the way diseases, undruggable diseases, are treated, and so fully believe in using the tools that we have for creating better quality of life for people around the world. And yeah, so I think so. The gist is that I've always been interested in space and biotech. It's been a passion for a long time. Finally, now it's it's becoming a reality.
So now the shift is from diagnosis to actually curing and treating disease is what you're pursuing now as the main goal. Um, which brings me to as a nice segue to the next question, which is mass balance says that you guys want to make the unmakeable and drugged undruggable, right? I guess before we get into the company itself, could you unpack what unmakeable and druggable mean? And what are some of the core challenges associated with this therapeutics or manufacturing of the therapeutics that you're trying to address through mass balance?
Yeah, exactly. So there are a number of disease areas in that are just very challenging to drug, and some of the common denominators of uh, why it's challenging comes down to the targets themselves. So, what proteins are you trying to interact with? And some of those proteins are just very, very difficult to deal with and find binding molecules to for all sorts of reasons. But we're particularly interested in how microgravity could be transformative for disordered misfolding and aggregating proteins where uh, we have a real lack of structure and there's a lot of chaos going on. And so, many diseases like in the neurodegenerative space, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, various dementias, driven by amyloid proteins that are disordered. They are shape shifting. They are variously described as like catching smoke, trying to target them, and there are kind of ways of interacting with those proteins that we believe microgravity will be transformative for in terms of finding new targets and curing new ways of drugging these kind of diseases. And also, same with many cancers, there are other proteins like MYC, the RAS family proteins, p53s that have disordered regions in them that are famously difficult to drug. They're well-known challenges. I've dogged pharma for a long time. And on the makeable side of things, there are many new drug modalities that are coming out that are increasingly complex. So, things like multi-specific antibodies, fusion proteins, it's like many cytokines, ADCs, they call them frankenproteins, these kind of amazing constructs that are being made. However, they can be very complex to make, and especially when it comes to actual manufacturing and scaling up. We kind of, some of our partners tell us about the challenges of shifting from R&D, or what works on the benchtop, into scaling. They see a lot of the same issues when it comes to unstable proteins, which is lack of structure, misfolding, aggregation, particularly falling out of solution, and a massive drop in yields from many proteins that can be described as difficult to express. And we're particularly interested in the protein side of things as our kind of niche and beachhead, and so we're the first biotech and space company to really go after that proteins and macromolecule behavior as the area we're really interested in. There's a lot of other interesting stuff that happens in terms of cell biology, and for us, cell biology, microgravity or microgravity cell biology will be an enabler. Some of the tools we use will be kind of space adapted cell lines, and there's many amazing, weird and wonderful things that happen to the way cells divide and the way they behave that could be very, very useful for pharma and biomanufacturing. And there's a lot of interesting other kind of areas in space biotech right now. However, we believe that the real kind of unlock, 'cause there is one unlocks, can lie in some of these, the way the physics of microgravity is interacting with macromolecule behavior.
It's extremely cool. And you kind of touched upon it, but I want to clarify for myself and for the viewers, what happens in microgravity is that, um, whether it's those macromolecules or proteins that allows your idea to work essentially for mass balance to do its job.
Yeah, so what's happening in microgravity? So gravity is pretty hard to get rid of, right? It's you could say it's the structure of the universe we live in itself, right? And so when you get the only way to get rid of it is to kind of go into free fall around the Earth, or free fall for a limited time in a drop tower or a parabolic flight or a sounding rocket. And there are simulated microgravity bioreactors, which essentially, you know, they rotate at such a kind of velocity and vector that the cells inside are constantly falling through the liquid media. However, you still have the forces of the liquid media that are essentially the kind of rushing past the cells as they continually fall. So it's not this is not the same. And long time researchers in the field will say like go to true microgravity if you want to find real results. So what's happening when you get rid of the intrinsic weight of a system? Heavier things don't sink. That's probably the weird place to start, and therefore you don't get buoyancy. So at the macro level, you don't get, or sedimentations, things don't fall to the bottom of your culture flask. And the micro level, you don't get convections. You don't get the constant currents where slightly less dense particles of liquid will rise, slightly denser will fall. And so you constantly have this micro turbulence that's very hard to get rid of. In microgravity, that doesn't happen. So you have this hyperquiescent, super stable environment, which itself is super interesting. And what that leads is to lack of, or very kind of reduced mass transfer. So the movement of molecules around is very much limited, and you get a diffusion limited environment, which then affects how molecules are behaving with the kind of the water molecules around them, and therefore how they're behaving in their in complexes and structures. And so this is where we think that the physics kind of points to, okay, we're looking at proteins, how things behave, and there's going to be something very interesting to start with. And we see that, from the protein crystallization story, which is a kind of probably one of the best told examples of biotech leveraging microgravity, where, it's a very kind of quite similar basis. We're just applying it to different problem sets.
I'm also assuming you can study unstable kind of transition states a bit more easily too in microgravity. Is that right?
Exactly, and that's one of the areas we will be very much looking into, and in particular, the kind of latency and availability of those transition states, if they are currently inaccessible, and how microgravity can start to reveal those.
This is genuinely so cool. It's sci-fi to me, but it's so genuinely so cool. And you mentioned that some of the indications you want to pursue is neurodegeneration. I'm assuming some oncology. What other kind of disease areas or indications, or I guess goals you have with mass balance?
Yeah, so we're very much going for this common denominator approach of like, okay, what are some challenges from how you target these particularly disorder proteins, misfolding aggregating proteins, and what are the kind of similar problems that we face in manufacturing drugs as well. But in terms of why go after different areas, we're keen to go after where the biggest unmet need is, and you look at neuro, it's huge. I mean, finding new drugs for Alzheimer's and dementia would be transformative for millions and millions of lives, and for something that has an impact of like more than $1 trillion per year on the economy, in terms of care burden, disease burden, would be massively transformative. So there's many different cancers you can go into as well. We are currently, working with people in like Cancer Research UK to kind of refine exactly how we go, where we kind of position ourselves in the cancer space. Obviously, there's a lot of funding there, and it's something that touches everyone's lives. And personally, actually, there's a recent story of a family diagnosis that gives me extra motivation to go into that and see what we can do and move the needle to diagnose previously kind of incurable cancers. But that said, in in drug discovery and in biotech in general, um, there are also many opportunities, like you mentioned, in rare diseases, and you can do very well from a company perspective by serving a particular, very focused population set. So we're also kind of very keen to explore opportunities in rare disease as well.
In yours, in neurodegeneration, right? Like, and I want to ask this very quickly. Um, Obviously, amyloid plaques have been kind of the go-to endpoint in terms of Alzheimer's research and stuff. And some people believe that endpoints need to be changed, and actually other things need to be looked at for this research area to progress to actual advancements to be seen. How are you thinking about how are you thinking about Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative disease? And how do you think microgravity will make it easier, or I guess better to study those diseases?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we wouldn't reveal kind of our exact kind of secret source projects, but
No, fair enough.
you kind of touched on one of the main areas we were looking at, which is like revealing kind of transient states, where yeah, that's kind of where we think there's a kind of a really interesting kind of beachhead for us in terms of generating novel, really novel, unlocking value from microgravity. You're definitely right over kind of debate and discourse over is it the right endpoint to go after. And so, yeah, we're watching the space, and yeah, if it's other targets to go after that are kind of equally cool and intractable, and maybe there's reasons why they haven't been gone after already, then open to research.
What struck me though, you guys are not positioning as just, oh, let's just manufacture drugs in space, but more so it's like a research biotech companies that you want to generate novel drugs, novel IP. Um, what made you think about that kind of sequencing? You know, why prioritize discovery over just going straight in space by manufacturing? I think broader space industries is very much focused on just producing kind of the logistics of it, right? What made you think about just going straight into discovery?
Yeah, so biomanufacturing in space is super sexy to talk about, and we believe in it definitely at some point. Is actually the original thesis when we were kind of putting together mass balance. I was super interested in precision fermentation in the space environment, and precision fermentation being essentially the workhorse for synthetic biology. And if you can do that well anywhere in the universe, then you can set up processes for doing anything you want, basically, right? And that's where biology is going. Um, the key thing is when you really start to think about it in terms of a business model, you got to think about, okay, what products are actually worth making in this slightly complicated environment? And the answer is that we don't really know, apart from a few select potential examples that companies like Vada and BioOrbit are kind of promoting in or pursuing in the protein crystallization space for reformulation of drugs. So in that sense, there is a potential to go for, okay, let's start trying to make these seed crystals, etc., at a higher scale. Um, However, in the broader sense, there's so much of biotech. Biotech is huge, and if you think about what fundamentally excites us, is that when new physics meets biology, then you get breakthroughs, and you see this from looking at places like go to Harvard, you've got the Harvard, they've got the diamond light source, and you've got new physics there, creating amazing structures or revealing amazing structures of proteins. You've got think about cryo and like cryo EM and like high temperature physics and PCR, and like things like that. So big breakthroughs can happen, and we're not even scratching the surface of what microgravity could reveal. And so if you think about a company like Varda, they are very much vertically integrating into building the hardware, building the capsules, the return capabilities. We want to integrate into the bio side of it. So we think that the value of the biotech IP and creating value within the data and the biotech IP is where what really excites us. And to enable that, we are building the hardware stack to do extremely sophisticated pharma grade analytics, high throughput in this novel environment, which is space. And but the key is being just a platform as a service isn't quite enough to really get us excited. And being scientists, we think, okay, and who want to challenge ourselves and the market, we think, okay, where is there really new? Where can we push the boat and really kind of get our claws into something new and own it? And when we discover products that are made in space essential, we'll have a larger chance of either owning them completely or in partnership with biotech partners that we've enabled them.
And when you zoom out, when you look at the landscape, because we mentioned already the BioOrbit, I think it's a UK company, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
And wider space industries, there's ones that are providing the infrastructure, the ones that are doing the research, or the ones that focus on logistics. When you look at the landscape, what kind of trends are you seeing? What kind of ideas seem promising? What kind of ideas you seeing kind of getting ahead of themselves?
Yeah, I think would definitely want to acknowledge there's a lot of cool stuff happening in space and biotech, and in terms of where you know the application of microgravity, for example, to organoids or to accelerate cell senescence for longevity based studies, in stem cell production. There's a lot of very interesting things where we kind of did a kind of our kind of filters of like where do we really want to focus and where do we think is really kind of interesting and new, and can we really push the boat out, and what's scalable, which is why we always came back to proteins as a kind of as a scalable potential product, but also kind of the kind of potential 0 to 1 unlocks in drug discovery. So that is more kind of exciting in the potentially massive step changes and the kind of scalability of products should you discover the essential made in space products. So where could it be getting ahead of itself? Yeah, I think it's still a nascent industry. There are a growing number of companies out there, and all credit to the kind of there's a kind of cohort of OG space biotech companies from the past a decade plus who have the vision to start, in the early in the 2010s, and now we're in a phase of post ISS. Those companies were leveraging ISS, leveraging services that were kind of set up, to leverage it to exploit astronauts and kind of that low cadence science projects, low throughput sort of platform. Now we're entering a world where cadence of access to microgravity and return mass and cost is massively changing. It's not changing yet, so it's not completely democratized yet. So now is the time to build for when it is. So when we're ready. But what needs to happen, I very strongly believe that taking a biotech first approach is what needs to happen if biotech is to be truly the kind of industry that really pays for the Leo manufacturing economy. We need to produce the data that proves it. And so we need to produce good data, do good science, and that's essentially how you win in biotech.
You've built a company in diagnostic space. You're building now in space biotech. As a scientist, as a visionary, as a founder, how do you see the difference and think about the difference between a cool, beautiful scientific idea versus a commercially viable product idea that someone will actually pay for?
So yeah, so having a cool scientific ideas depends what's the function that you're solving for. What framework are you operating with? So in science, you're looking at the landscape of fundamental knowledge, right? And you're thinking, okay, how do I make a new chink in the boundaries of that fundamental limits of human knowledge? Whereas in the market, you're thinking, okay, what do customers need? What do they want? What do they don't know they need? What would they pay for? And that is a very different challenge, right? And it's interesting because there's a real dichotomy between, call it like creative genius within science to come up with solutions to fundamental problems, even technical solutions, engineering solutions, and then building something to meet you know to meet what the customer, meet what the market needs, and then what people love using and paying for. And in some sense, I do think there's still room, and I think people should always still think the crazy ideas, be creative, have keep room for what you think people need because you think it's a beautiful idea, etc. And that is how diversity of knowledge and solutions happens. Whether that fits the market is then the next challenge, and the reality is, you could think about, ideally, if you're trying to build a new product and you've got your market and you want to go out and do your customer discovery, and yeah, you want to match as much as possible, but you also want to bring solutions to the table, right? And you have to come up with those solutions. So that's where creativity comes in. and to build something beautiful, something some people really love and they didn't know they need. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's a whole kind of discussion about customer discovery itself. Um, but yeah, I think that's also a lot of room for potentially helping scientists and people who and engineers who do have that kind of like creative potential um to to make awesome new things, help them understand market dynamics and how to find a market fit.
I guess what I'm gathering, and correct me if I'm wrong, for what you're saying, is that let your creativity be guided by the market. Is that a good recap of what you said?
Absolutely, as long as you don't lose your creativity, you can
Mhm.
try and yeah. I mean, this is, I guess, of course, my opinion. It also depends what you're doing, right? If like B2B SaaS product, as you know exactly what it needs to do, and there's not much room for creativity other than like the color of whatever, and maybe like your user flow, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're, you know, building a, I don't know, building a rocket,
No, I mean you're right. Even with rocket like SpaceX, yeah, you had to be creative to come up with.
right, exactly.
Obviously, you
So
needed the
in
capital.
the 2000 early 2000s, the markets that SpaceX are, you know, well, actually, if you actually know SpaceX, is a great example. They created their own market. They created
Exactly.
Starlink, right?
Exactly.
And the rest of the market is kind of following. And so that's where, yeah, credit to Mr. Musk is
Exactly.
he needs to
Exactly.
push the boat up.
Which we're talking about money, so I'm going to follow up with another money question and a market question, which is from kind of funding perspective, right? As you mentioned, B2B SaaS, I feel like most kind of general VC investors are familiar with the B2B SaaS kind of dynamics, expectations, and there's biotech investors who are more kind of comfortable with traditional therapeutics uh, companies. Um, Biotech is very capital intensive. Space is even more capital. It requires more capital. When you, how do you pitch a space biotech company? Who do you pitch to? What kind of VC profiles do you go after? And what's the overall VC appetite for space like this? I mean, I know there's founders fund in the US, for example, is very much known for investing in very kind of frontier tech startups. But overall, I'm curious. You've been in the space for such a long time now. Um, or what's your overview of the space?
Well, I guess maybe the secret is that space isn't that as prohibitive as it once was. But I don't want to tell too many people that because I want to keep it to ourselves. Um, it's still difficult, but we've proven, myself and my co-founder, who are biologists by background, that we can build space hardware. We built our first platform in less than 3 months, an insane journey, and it will fly to space very soon. I can't quite feel, but it will fly to space very soon, and that is super exciting. And so the fact that the value chain is now there to kind of help companies like us do that and help us focus on creating value from this new environment. Uh, that is a new world. That is new, and that is only going to get more enabling for for people to do more wild and crazy things. um, I think because of this, some of the incumbents, and you mentioned a few of the larger companies that have raised quite a lot of funding on the VC side of things or in general investor side of things. It's usually not a kind of first time they've heard of it. Occasionally, yes, someone's never heard of the concept of biotech in space, um, but it's often the case that people have heard of one or two companies. And because space is space, and one of the reasons space is so exciting to work in is it is exciting. People love it. It really sells, and people remember it. So actually, one of the issues is that while there aren't that many companies around, people remember it and kind of assume that you're kind of doing the same thing as them. Whereas really not. There are probably 10, 20 space biotech companies around the world. And how many biotech AI companies or traditional AI companies are there? There are thousands, right? And so the way I see it is there's still so much more room to collaborate and build out this industry. And we're not going to be competitive, unless we're building exactly the same things for quite a while. So yeah, I think, but now I really do believe that we're in this era of moving from, call it this kind of original or these OG companies working with the ISS to let's fully industrialize now and potentially look at like what really could scale both in space operations, the platform usage, the data you can produce, and the products and value you can produce. Um, and the onus now the onus is on companies like us to really prove out the value with good data and good science to win in markets like biotech, where that's what counts.
When I quickly looked at the numbers, which I'm kind of forgetting right now, but the most of the portion of the funding, as you mentioned, kind of was skewed towards like this big few names. And Varda raised, I think, 187 million Series D or Series Z or something like that. And majority of the investors were dominated by US investors too. Are you seeing, like, how are you seeing the appetite between the European investors versus the American investors when it comes to stuff like
Not supposed to start complaining about
that?
certain sectors of VC on the record, but yeah, well, no, there's always that UK, EU versus US, dichotomy of bigger, bolder bets being taken earlier in the US. And that's, there are reasons for that: institutional, structural, the way things are here, markets, the availability of capital, the handcuffs that the funds themselves have, you know, and then you get to the kind of attitudes and the culture side of things, which, is arguably what you can complain the most about because that's what is most easily changeable. But I'd say, there is a very healthy appreciation of what, what is possible in space and in deep tech in Europe and UK. I mean, aside from the ability to scale and, certain ease of access to large funds, Europe is amazing for deep tech, and in UK in particular, in biotech and all sorts of areas. You know, I won't go into this a whole conversation itself, but we should be punching well above where we are right now. And I'm sure we will. We're going to figure it out and, pull our fingers out and get going with this. But yeah, I'd say it's something that has been evolving. It's been actually, I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised almost at how receptive the deep tech VC community has been. What's been really interesting also is getting to know different kinds of investors from deep tech, space tech, and biotech. Have a very different mindset, um, versus biotech investors traditionally are very focused on the asset generation, the value generation. They really get that journey, understand it. Whereas on the more deep tech side of things, it's okay, it's a platform. Biotech is this kind of potential value generating unicorn we kind of understand, but want to see, you kind of really showing people are going to use the platform. It's going to generate that large revenues and it's going to scale. And that's, we're going to essentially be towing the line there. And there is value to, in brief, to kind of sequentially doing both to prove out the value of the platform, start producing the data that informs then our pipeline.
Do you find it challenging when you have to pitch different profiles of VCs? Like, obviously, the idea, the company stays the same, but when you pitch to a biotech-focused VC versus a space-focused VC versus deep tech-focused VC, I'm assuming you're taking different angles. Do you find it challenging switching between those kind of approaches, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been incredible, speaking to so many and learning from the really good ones. I'd say, yeah, you don't change your pitch completely because you can't tell a different story because you're building one thing, but you may emphasize different elements that you want them to kind of to dig in on, and ultimately, I think there's a consortium of different kinds of investors who will help prove out this, both on the space and the hardware side of things. And there are some space tech VCs who really understand how the infrastructure in LEO and the rest of the space economy is being built and what applications are really going to win. And they are starting to really get the biotech side of things. I'd say on the pure biotech side of things, space is newer and more of a kind of knocking on the door rather than kind of an obvious thing they should get into. But that's kind of definitely changing. We've been speaking to lots of super interesting funds on the biotech side that are really taking this seriously, and that kind of follows the market, obviously. So it's worth mentioning, talking about the pharma market, biotech market in space, and what's really exciting and what gets me really kind of excited to dive into, go and close the world, is that there is a lot more latent interest within biopharma for new and interesting and slightly out there platforms like space than you think there is. The problem is that what we call space champions within each pharma company are kind of hidden in within the woods because these companies are so big, they don't communicate between departments. And so, for example, one example I have is that J&J actually had its own space conference, their space
Wow.
a year ago of it, and I've spoken to many people from J&J, and none of them have heard of it. And so there's so much opportunity to bring all these people together and show them actually, yeah, there's enough of you here that want to move the needle here. And when we show there is a genuine, you know, 0 to 1 unlock and unfair advantage to be had, if you're not operating, if you don't have a space strategy, you're going to be losing.
This is genuinely so cool. You are building in a very exciting space, and obviously companies like this, startups like this, not only creating something very meaningful, but also they're changing the way we think about just resilience, just the bigger. What's a good way to put it? You're shaping narratives in a way, right? And I guess one way you're also doing it is by building the critical mass, which is supposed to bring together from dual use, deep tech, defense, and national resilience together. Um, I'm curious to learn more about that initiative. What are you building, and is the deeper thesis behind it that UK needs to get better at turning frontier science into sovereign capability?
Yeah, I think so. I'm totally mad about space and biotech, like unreasonably obsessed with it. And I truly believe and 100% focus on making this happen. I also love living in a place in the world where I have the freedom to do that. And let's not get into politics, but I do think there are a lot more freedoms we have here than certain other countries who like to use the word a lot. And that, if that comes under threat, I think that's worrying existentially. And so there was, call it like a side project I had with a business partner a year and a half ago now almost, where we were kind of exploring concepts of venture builders, accelerators, and what it turned into was a regular series of get-togethers, events that coincided with basically Trump coming into office and defense becoming mainstream. And we just found there was a real latent kind of need or desire from that community to get together and talk. And partly because it's a community that obviously is by its nature kind of under the radar and subtle. There is also an element that can be out there, and increasingly we saw a shift from defense and dual use technology being kind of taboo to invest in to being a must-have invest category. So it's a people's attitude shift. So essentially, what we're trying to do is just bring people together. Good things happen when people talk together in the same room. And beyond that, co-location is key, and clusters are key. So doing our little bit, firstly with events. So we've done focus dinners, and which have been fantastic fun, amazing networking, and awesome for mass balance as well. I mean, sure, that's the idea. I want to build the house and the most amazing deep tech community in London to build what I think could be a generation company in mass balance to take biology to the stars.
Well, I'm inspired, Toby. I'm inspired. Are you seeing positive shifts? I guess, I know you don't like to complain, but what kind of changes would you like to see to foster that deep tech ecosystem more here in the UK?
Yeah, I think so the view we have with critical mass, and one of the kind of ulterior motives we kind of had before, and we'll see how we can support this happening, if not kind of to ourselves, is literally creating kind of in-person co-location of companies in the same value chains next door to each other. And I always kind of reference what we see in El Segundo in the south of LAX in California, where you have this ecosystem that's built up for years and years and years, and it has its deep origins from aerospace engineering after the war. So it didn't just appear out of nowhere, but that has become the de facto kind of center for the best place in the world to do deep tech hardware engineering, where your customers, your supply chain are all kind of down the road, right? And you have warehouse space to build, you've got talent and you've got capital. London has capital. We've got the city here. Got a lot of money flowing through London. We have talent. People want to come to London more than ever, especially in this geopolitical environment. We've got the opportunity to attract some of the best talent in the world. And we have like amazing companies here. What we don't have is kind of a Station F in Paris style co-location, or massive collection of warehouses where you think, where do I go if I want to meet all the companies that are building the future, literally building the future? And I think there's room for that. And I'm excited to see that happen at some point.
I'm excited to see the success stories coming from your way, especially with mass balance. I guess in 5 to 10 years from now, maybe hopefully sooner, what does success for mass balance look like in the strongest version of your story, of this story?
Yeah, we want to really prove the value of microgravity to life sciences. And, that's kind of number one goal is unequivocally producing the data that says unequivocally, operating in the space environment gives the life science industry, competitive edge. And this is not just a crazy project in space that might be nice and good for PR. It is an essential part of our discovery process, our manufacturing chain, and it's churning, and we're operating at high cadence, launches, activity in space environment, generating value, new data, new products. We want to become a company that gets used to operating in space. And that means, again, regular launches, and the cadence is what's changing in terms of microgravity. And that's actually an interesting segue into like the things are changing. It's changing from you had to plan a year, 6 months in advance, or 2 years in advance to do an experiment in space. Whereas we're entering a world where you can be much more reactive. And that is what the market wants. So you need to meet kind of their timelines. Once we get very good at doing biotech in space and we become a company that is used to operating in space regularly, that's when your horizons kind of open. And space has this way of being bigger and having bigger impacts than you think it might have done. And that's where we really think, even thinking forward to the unknown opportunities that might arise, when we get really good at biotech in space and lunar and Mars economies open up, we need companies to do the plumbing, the biological life support systems, to make the drugs, to do the healthcare, to do everything, and we'll be ready.
Toby, this is kind of, I don't know, it awakens like a child in me. I used to find encyclopedia books and magazines. This is futuristic technology, futuristic science, and I read it very avidly and obsessively. And I feel like this kind of awakens that kind of curiosity and inspiration within me. So it's genuinely such an interesting and a cool episode, and I cannot wait to redo this episode down the line when hopefully those success metrics you have in mind, you've managed to achieve them. I guess as a final question, I'm going to ask a bit of a reflection, bit of a philosophical, bit of a life question, which is, I feel like it's important to ask. You've recently become a father and you're building a company, one of the hardest kind of categories out there. How has that becoming a father, I guess, changed the way you think about being a founder, in terms of, not only in terms of time and pressure and balance, but also in terms of legacy, purpose, and what success actually means?
Yeah, look, it's the most amazing thing. But if you took actually those two categories of like time and pressure on the kind of difficult negative, but also on the other side, legacy, creating a new world, they nicely counterbalance each other. Yes, once you're already in hard mode when you're building a new company, and when you're building something a little bit new like we are, it's extra hard mode. And when your daughter arrives prematurely, and I thought we had a few more months even to do the fundraising, but no, it's super, super hard mode. But once you're in that kind of mindset, someone like me is just even more determined to make it work. yeah, practically it definitely forces efficiency. Operating on much less sleep is challenging, but it really, yeah, it's super motivating. And I think, you know, what is the world that I want to create for my daughter?
Toby, thanks so much for such a wonderful and insightful episode. And I wish you tons of luck with your startup.
Awesome, man. Thanks very much.